Hello and welcome to Dialogue. A season of reconciliation is blossoming in the Middle East. Arch enemies Saudi Arabia and Iran signed a joint statement in Beijing in early April to restore diplomatic ties. Egypt and Turkey are also taking steps to end their decade-long feud. Qatar and the UAE will soon resume diplomatic relationship, and Syria is returning to the Arab League. How did this wave of reconciliation begin? Could Gulf and Arab states, as well as countries in the region, embrace a better future without the strong presence of the United States? And how might these positive changes impact the political and trade landscape of the region? To answer these questions and more, I'm joined by Professor Seyed Mohammad Marandi at the University of Tehran, Kawa Hassan, non-resident fellow on the Middle East and North Africa at the Stimson Center, Professor Gong at University of International Business and Economics, and Ali Ahmed, Director of the Institute for Gulf Affairs. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Welcome to the discussion. I will start with Kawa Hassan. Mr. Hassan, so tell us, the question is like, people asking, what has led to the reconciliation, or, how did this reconciliation and detente and the dialogue started?
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. So I think there are a combination of factors which have led to the current detente. First of all, a conflict and confrontation fatigue from both sides due to different reasons, geopolitical, strategic reasons, COVID-19, obviously, and a deep perception in the Gulf region, particularly in Saudi Arabia and some other GCC countries, about U.S. disengagement from the region, and also the need for economic stability. So there are political, geopolitical, economic reasons, but also COVID, obviously. But I think, one of the key reasons is what I call confrontation and conflict fatigue. So they came to realize that it's time really to try to improve relations, because that will be in the interest of both countries, but also it will be in the interest of the entire region.
Mm-hmm. Well, John, conflict fatigue. Why don't you brief us, especially for viewers who are not following closely on the moves of reconciliation recently? This is a quite complicated, process, between Arab states or Gulf states, or between Arab countries with Iran, with Turkey, etc.
That's right, indeed. It's
absolutely.
First of all, I have to say.
Sorry, John, please. Yeah.
Okay, sorry about this. I think this is a seismic change in the Middle East. I think it started out mostly, with the rethinking of foreign policy and strategic thinking on the part of Saudi Prince MBS. I think he is really the center of, and I think the origin of all this, what I would describe as the great rapprochement in the Middle East. He already started the negotiation behind doors with Iran. I think that's the most important relationship in the Middle East. I think there are several reasons behind this. For example, first of all, of course, is the war fatigue that has been going on for so many years in Yemen, and I think also very importantly, it's very clear that the United States engagement in the Gulf region is waning. And I think the interests are also starting to diverge, especially in the wake of this war in Ukraine. Obviously Saudi and other Gulf states have an interest to maintain certain level of oil price, and I think a rapprochement with Iran is certainly in their interest. And of course, and also I have to emphasize the role that China has played in terms of facilitating and promoting a negotiation peace among these countries. So I think this is really a profound change that has implications for the entire region. And also I think, you mentioned the rapprochement among the Arab countries, the Muslim countries, but also I want to add to that regarding the country that I'm residing right now, that's the state of Israel. Israel also is in the process of rapprochement rapprochement with several Arab countries. It has already established diplomatic relationships with UAE, with Morocco, with Bahrain, and I don't think it's a far-fetched imagination to say that someday, not so far away, that Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and Israel will come to the table for diplomatic recognition of each other.
Professor Marandi, you are in Tehran. How does Iran or people in Iran think of this reconciliation process? In particular, this restoration of diplomatic ties with Saudi Arabia.
It is very important. The two countries over the last years have been working towards rapprochement. It
seems there's a tech glitch, and we have Ali Al-Ahmed. Ali Al-Ahmed, please, we'll go to Ali Al-Ahmed. What's your view or what's your point of this reconciliation process, among countries in the region? And, what are the major factors you see as the driver for reconciliation and detente?
The rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran was basically a normal course of events, because these two large countries are in an important part of the world could not really survive or operate normally with this tension between them. It's been on and off for the past 40 years, but the best times for both countries has been when they are actually close to each other, when they work together economically, when it comes to the oil business, security, and the regional stability has been when Saudi Arabia and Iran worked together, and it did not last for long because there were external factors. Mainly the United States has been trying to divide these two countries and the region in general. So with Mohammed bin Salman trying to become more independent from American policy, I think that was an easy conclusion to make for the Saudi government to make that approach. For Iran too, it found that its relationship with Saudi Arabia serves it at all levels, economically and its status in the region. So I think it's a win-win situation for both governments, for both states. And I want to mention something here, that China really did a great job with this, and this is something I would like to call the Muhammad Accords, because the United States have been pushing a relationship between Israel and other Arab countries and celebrated it with and given it the word Abraham Accords. This is the Muhammad Accords, which I think the more we see of this Muhammad Accords happening with China or other countries' help, you will see the region become more prosperous and more stable, and its people happier. Even though these states could be dictatorships or repressive, but countries, when they come together, things are better for everybody, for the states, for the governments, and for the people.
Well, Professor Marandi, back to you about the views from Iran. What are the factors driving, rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and probably, countries in the region to talk to each other instead of alienating each other?
I think one part of it is the relative decline of the United States and its lessening influence, because the United States and the Israeli regime, they thrive on divisions in this region. And I'm sure you recall 3.5 years ago when General Soleimani went to Iraq and was murdered by Trump. He was going to see the Prime Minister of Iraq to discuss a letter from Saudi Arabia which was about rapprochement between the two countries. So the Iraqi prime minister at that time was sort of helping in a sort of mediation effort. And Iranians believe that the Americans knew what this meeting was for, and they wanted to block it. That was at least one of the reasons why they assassinated the general. Afterwards, of course, the Iraqis again proposed mediation. It moved forward, and most of the negotiations took place in Iraq. Some of them took place in Oman. But ultimately, it was in China where, and the reason why I think China succeeded is that unlike the United States, which likes to manipulate and which takes sides and is basically looking after its own selfish interests, the Chinese were there to facilitate real rapprochement. And therefore in Beijing, after, again, when the Chinese president visited Saudi Arabia, they discussed this. Then it was proposed to the Iranian president. He agreed. The negotiations took place in Beijing. And we've achieved these results, which are very important. It's not just Iran and Saudi Arabia. We're now seeing how Saudi Arabia is negotiating with Sana'a, with the government with Yemen, with the Syrians. We also now see the Emirates moving and negotiating with the Syrians, the Kuwaitis. And if we have some sort of agreement between Turkey and Syria, then I think we will see a huge change. But even without that, I think we're already seeing huge changes in the region. The Persian Gulf region is very important for the world. The countries in this region have enormous mutual interests, and de-escalation is one part of it, but also the potential for the countries to work together to build the region is also huge. So if this process continues to move forward, I think we will see major changes in the coming months and years.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Kawa Hassan, we'll come back to these benefits to be expected out of this process. But before that, we are also seeing the reconciliation process between Syria and quite a number of Arab countries, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE. Now the Foreign Minister of Syria is visiting Tunisia. So tell us, what prompted those countries to seek to restore their relationship with Syria, which is still under sanction by the US and European countries?
Yes, so I think there is a most of the Arab countries, including the countries in GCC, they have came to conclude that in the absence of a US Western grand strategy to try to solve the problem in Syria, in the absence of that strategy, they came to the conclusion that probably it's better for them to engage the regime in Syria. Now, this process is moving quite quickly, and even not only the Syrian foreign minister visiting Tunisia. Yesterday, also the Saudi foreign minister, for the first time since the start of the conflict in Syria, he visited Damascus. So and also the foreign minister of Syria was in Saudi Arabia. So the bottom line is that UAE, Saudi Arabia, some other Arab countries, they came to to conclude that despite all the difficulties of engaging with the Syrian regime, and we don't know where this process will lead, whether it may lead to a restoration of diplomatic relations, but whether it will lead to to any settlement for the Syrian conflict, that remains to be seen. But for the time being, they came to conclude that in the absence of a Western strategy, it's better for them to engage the Syrian regime. Also, out of fear for the impact of Coptagon, the drugs that is coming from Syria to the Gulf countries. So I think this is the background for this strategic calculation of Saudi Arabia, UAE, and some other countries to try to improve relations with Syria.
Mm-hmm. Professor John Gong in Israel, we know that there's an element of the U.S. People would say because of the declining presence of the U.S., somehow that prompted countries or some of the countries to seek reconciliation with their previous rivals. How big element is that?
Well, I think it's more than that. I think the Biden administration always claims that the United States presence in a region is not going to wane, and they're going to continue their presence here. But I think the other perspective is that these Gulf countries are tired of the kind of a geopolitical game that has been played for the last few decades. They're pretty much influenced by the United States under the so-called U.S.-led security architecture. This thing is not working in my view. I think all the countries have come to the consensus that economic development, trade among the countries, peace with each other are really more important. And these things can be achieved aside from disagreements over religion, over ethnic backgrounds, and it even doesn't have to be done with the help from an outside force. If you really look at what the United States can bring to the table in dealing with these countries, I think not much other than setting arms and stationing troops over there. I think more important thing for these countries is really trade and investment. I mean, look at the grandiose strategic vision by MBS in Saudi Arabia for building Saudi Arabia into the next level, more than a country just exporting oil and energy products, but more about developing a modern economy, a digital economy, based on manufacturing, based on research and innovation. If you look at the grand picture of the world, the Arab world used to be shining, right? Hundreds of years ago, used to be leading the world, for the last several hundred years ago. But now it's really lagging behind, and I think countries like UAE and currently what Saudi is doing is shedding a new light on where the Arab world is going to. And I think this grand vision cannot be achieved without economic cooperation among the countries among themselves, and also with the major economic powers. So I think it's right time to set aside all these geopolitical, geostrategic game plans and really focus on economy, focus on peace. And I think that's really what's driving the society moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ali Ahmed, when you talked about the positive role played by China in facilitating these talks. Of course, the U.S. has been here for decades, and there are chaos, let's say, conflicts in wars in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, and Yemen. So some people in the U.S. are talking about the U.S. being marginalized. Is the U.S. being marginalized, or what role has the U.S. played in this region?
Look, this really the modern time, the American policy was shaped mostly during the Carter administration, what they call the Carter Doctrine. And what happened is that the United States really militarized the Gulf region and the Arab countries. I recall many conversations I had with American officials over the past 2 decades regarding why isn't the U.S. Not helping and not interested in building schools and hospitals and roads in our countries. They were only interested in one thing: building military bases and selling arms. They were really not interested in making these countries better and supporting dictatorships only. And that really, at the end of the day, there's a famous Egyptian play that my generation knows. It's called The Kids Have Grown. The region, the people, and even the leaderships of these countries have really realized after 4 decades that the United States has been doing the worst thing for us, only bringing guns and bombs. And the United States has killed more Muslims than any other countries in the world, in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Egypt, you name it, Iran, Iraq. So the U.S. now is not withdrawing. They still have a lot of military bases, but the people and the governments in the region have realized that this American model is not good for us. But the Chinese model, economy, building, roads, China is the leading economic partner of Saudi Arabia and Iran and many other countries in the region. So this is the way forward, the future of the region depends on that particular model. And I think the difference between China and the United States is this, that one wants to bring death and one wants to bring bread and roads and hospitals, and they still in the United States do not understand that that these people in the region deserve schools and hospitals and roads and some rights and freedom. Nobody's talking about a utopia, but it's talking about some actual humanitarian situation, like sanctions, for example. China is not sanctioning any country and starving its people to death. The United States is doing that. So this is really an important part of a strategic decision that the United States has not yet decided to change. When you have a problem with a country, with Iran or Saudi Arabia, you do not starve the people and deprive them from medicine. So I think this is the way forward. Is going to be the China way, and I think that they will succeed more in bringing other countries together, because it's not only benefiting those governments or those regimes, be they are dictatorships or not. It's also benefiting the people and benefiting the mediator, that could be China.
Yeah. Professor Marandi, when U.S. President Biden was in Saudi Arabia last June, in 2022, he mentioned that, countering the Chinese influence is the reason why he was there. The U.S. has a overall policy of containing the rise of China. How will that, or might impact, the development in this region? China is focusing on peace and development, but the U.S. is focusing right now, seems the priority is really about China.
Well, that is the whole problem. The United States is a very selfish regime. In our region, in West Asia, the United States has constantly tried to divide countries in order to preserve the apartheid regime in Israel. So it's always been everything against Iran, or anything against Syria, or everyone against Yemen, or they've tried to manipulate countries to turn them against one another for their own interests. They're not interested in Saudi Arabia or the Emirates or Kuwait or Iraq. They're interested in their own benefits. And when it comes to China, it's the same thing. When it comes to Russia, it's the same thing. Everything is about the United States and its allies, its own supremacy. It's not interested in the development of our region, and it's not interested in the development of Latin America. It's not interested in the development of Africa or anywhere else. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the situation that we have in today's world. So what is happening is that the United States, because it has, it's because of its own foolish policies, its endless wars, also crony capitalism, and the fact that they've destroyed their own middle class. In addition to that, the crises now with Russia that they've brought upon themselves by expanding NATO and all that, which I don't want to get into, and now the rivalry with China. They've overextended themselves, and that is helping to bring down their empire, because they're basically against everyone. And what that has done is that by overextending themselves, they've weakened their position in different parts of the world. So we see Latin America moving, at least theoretically, and taking some steps towards integration and to developing ties with China, with Iran, and other countries, non-Western countries. We see that in West Asia as well. As your previous guest said, now the Saudis are looking for their own interests. It's not like in the past where the United States was the dominant force in the Persian Gulf region. Now it is declining. They are still powerful. They're still dangerous. They have bases all over the region, and they do not want to see rapprochement. But their capabilities are not as great as they were 15, 20 years ago. And so what will happen? Basically, those countries that are linked to the United States will weaken, and those countries that move towards a more global worldview, they are going to benefit. Right now, Saudi Arabia and Iran, if they work together, You have the north-south corridor that comes from Russia to the Persian Gulf. You have the Belt Road Initiative that goes from Central Asia to West Asia. Iran and Saudi Arabia and other countries in the region would benefit enormously. And this, of course, as I said, this is not what the Americans want. This is against their interest. The Americans are not looking for better, more schools. In fact, they're the ones who've destroyed the schools. They're the ones who've they've destroyed Libya, they've destroyed Iraq, they've destroyed Afghanistan, they've destroyed so much of Syria through their dirty war. Look at Venezuela, look at Cuba, look at all. It's not just our region, it's not just West Asia and North Africa. But I'm optimistic about the future because I think that in this transition to a multipolar world, it is going to be much more difficult for countries like the United States to continue with this empire-like style of foreign policy. They simply won't have the ability to do so, but it is a dangerous period. It is a very dangerous period because declining empires can become very unpredictable.
Mr. Kawa Hassan, you know, of course, this is the initial stage for reconciliation, detente. You know, many people pointed to the complex nature, let's say, of relationship among countries in the region. What are the potential risks and challenges, you know, ahead for them to continue to pursue, you know, a better relationship or peace and stability here?
Well, I think this deal brokered by China is very, very important for both countries, for the region, and it's a first step in, you know, it could be seen as a building block to improve ties in, you know, economic relations between both countries, security relations in the future. But I think there are some big risks there. Still, you know, the mistrust between Iran and Saudi Arabia will remain, but both countries seem to be very willing to first restore diplomatic ties, and then the current momentum could be used by both countries to, you know, to engage in certain policy issues which are of benefit for both countries and for the entire region. For instance, climate change, health resilience, and pandemic preparedness, people-to-people exchange, economic integration and cooperation, and also renewable energy. They could also be used, you know, as a you know, good base for better coordination on energy policies. But of course, you know, there are you know, spoilers, maybe, you know, in both countries internally, but also spoilers, you know, regionally, internationally. It seems like Israel is not happy with the deal. Maybe also some other, you know, actors are not happy with the deal. But also the deep mistrust and perceptions between both countries, which goes back to decades of, you know, of mistrust between them. It will not be easy to overcome them, but this deal will pave the way for better communication between both countries. And as I said, in the short term, you know, it's a good news for the region, but in the long term, medium, long term, it's important for both countries to capitalize on the momentum and try to, you know, to work on topics which are important for both countries and the region. And those are the issues which I mentioned.
With that, we come to the end for today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thank you for being with us. See you next time.